that reaches out and partners with communities, we can turn that around.
Our next question is on housing. The cost of housing has reached the crisis level in our city. According to the Alliance for Affordable Nashville, in 2017, 72% of zip codes in Nashville were considered affordable. By 2021, the number had dropped to just 21%. Aside from the obvious answer of increasing funding, what will you do as mayor to create more affordable housing in Nashville? We'll start with Councilman O'Connell, with Freddie O'Connell, and then come back to Alice Rowling.
Thanks, David. I think to your point, it's about more than funding. I think I'll start here. Transit is a part of our affordable housing toolkit, and I can say this from the experience of having it be a part of my pathway to homeownership. When I had paid off undergraduate loans, it was far more cost-effective to learn how to use our functional, but not nearly as widespread as it needs to be, transit system. And over the period of 3.5 years, I saved up enough money for a down payment on a house when it was more affordable. But we can lower the cost of household transportation for a lot of people. The mayor's office has a lot of capacity to do coordination. We are right now, in some ways, our biggest obstacle to our own affordable housing projects. I've got, in the area I represent, an affordable housing project from Clark Memorial United Methodist Church that's ready to go. But as soon as we hit the permitting process, we started grinding in our own gears. And I am working on legislation to make that easier before I leave office. But the mayor's office can also help with encouraging the maximization of enrollment in programs like our property tax freeze and relief programs for Nashvillians who are 65 and up and on a fixed income. We just raised the income ceiling for that, and it should be a strategic goal of the city to make sure that everyone who is eligible, we know who they are and encourage them to participate, help them wayfind and get into those programs and stay in those programs. Meanwhile, we can create a standalone office of housing to be a part of the unified housing plan that is coming out right now. The good news is a lot of our Affordable Housing Task Force report items are in progress. Thank you.
So many people in this city are struggling with affordable housing that it's an emergency. And we have to take an all-hands-on-deck approach to addressing this. And, you know, that means that we have to deal with the other issues of affordability. And let's just be clear, when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about a range of issues. We're talking about, you know, all the way from the unhoused people to people who can't afford to buy a starter home. And there is a large block of people that fall within those parameters. And so my office will initially, from the downbeat, do a comprehensive assessment of our public lands to identify public land where affordable housing would be viable. We need to streamline our permitting process because I talk to developers who would love to build affordable housing, but the permitting process is so onerous and the bottlenecks are so bad that they can't do that. And then we also have to address the issues that are feeding this problem, like childcare and early childhood education. A good friend of mine, she has an amazing job. She actually struggled with quitting her job because she couldn't afford to get childcare for her daughter, and she was really having to make a choice between those two things. That surely is not what we want to happen for Nashvillians. So we need to address all of these issues because they're all related.
Thank you very much, Matt Wilshire.
So on a bunch of issues, David, you're going to be asking about what we need to do. And I think the question is, who's actually delivered? As you know, I left a job that I loved 4 years ago and moved to MDHA to work on affordable housing because I saw this issue 4 years ago. And it had been an issue that the city has struggled with for some time before that. And in just 3 years, we were able to help build over 4,000 units that Nashvillians could actually afford. And to your point, it's not just about funding. 500 of those units were in a redevelopment of James Casey homes through a mixed income approach so that we weren't just suburbanizing poverty and no one was displaced. That was a government investment and improved the quality of life for residents and added to affordable housing. But on top of that, and more importantly, we worked with the private sector to develop 3,500 units of affordable housing across the county. To your point, it is not just about funding. It's about working with the public sector and the private sector together to come together. And this question about permitting is a difficult one, and there have been some real challenges in the permitting process. But we actually, when I was in the mayor's office, passed some legislation with council to get projects that were designated as affordable housing projects moved to the top of the list for permitting. That process expedites permitting 4 projects that are producing affordable housing. So it is taking approaches like that to actually deliver results. I'm someone who has done that and will continue to do it as your mayor.
Thank you very much. Sharon Hurt.
And I too have done affordable housing, real affordable housing, and moved that affordable housing to attainable housing with the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. And I think that's what we have to do, is create more housing with the underutilized properties that we have, vacant buildings that we have all over. We've got to be intentional about doing housing for those people that need it the most. We want to restore hope and prosperity on every block, in every community, and not leave one person behind. I think what Matt is talking about, perhaps it was affordable back then, but today it isn't. And I know that it's not going to be. So what I want to do is increase wages and salaries, have economic equality, equity, and empowerment for all Nashvillians, because that's going to be very, very important. We have an economic tsunami that is going to hit this city with the East Bank redevelopment, which we've got to ensure that there's going to be affordable and attainable housing there. We've got property in Bordeaux where we can utilize affordable and attainable housing. We recently passed DADUs. I think we got to focus on intergenerational housing, because we've got people who are living longer and they're working longer, and we need to bring them in together. And we want to preserve housing for those people as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Gingrich.
Well, I'm glad that some folks have noticed that we have an affordable housing issue in the last several years. But if you go back to the 2015 mayoral forums, it was a big issue in those forums. And we were talking about it before that. We have done multiple affordable housing studies in this city. Each one has concluded that it's really bad and it's worse than the last time we did the previous study, and those studies sit on the shelf and they gather dust and we don't do much about it. So we today, as you just said, David, are at a crisis. Our teachers, our police officers, our metro workers, the people who serve our city cannot afford to live in the city at this point in time, particularly if they're starting off. And this causes all types of issues in recruiting teachers, recruiting police officers. Folks can't live in the county, so they're commuting into the county. So look, we got to do 3 things and have to get on it fast. I mean, we've talked about properly funding the Barnes Fund consistently to turbocharge the nonprofit sector. That needs to continue. We've talked about the East Bank and using land there for affordable housing. We have other land across the city should be considered. But this is now tens of thousands of units, a multi-billion-dollar challenge. The only place that has that type of capital is the private sector. And as Heidi said, this should not be the most difficult city to build affordable housing in. There are a whole set of things that we can do with the private sector.
Vivian Wilhoit.
So when I went in as the assessor of property back in 2016, one of the first things that I recognized is that values had appreciated greatly. So I met with NOAA and gave NOAA their agenda. Go out, ensure that people are aware that the tax freeze program and the tax relief program, which was under-communicated to all of our community, to make sure that the people knew about those programs. Knock on the doors, make sure that they were aware. I began to work with Reverend Representative Love to increase the income qualification to ensure that more people can qualify. This was in 2016. Now we sit here in 2023. I continue to work with Representative Love, talking to him year by year to talk about how we need to change our way of how people can qualify who live here. We're talking about people who are already here, people. How do we allow them to be able to stay? And successfully, the income level to qualify for the tax freeze relief has happened. Thank God. But in order for affordable housing, in order for it to be credible, we must increase the stock. It's the simple supply and demand. There's not enough supply. So as the assessor of property, I have recognized and have identified more than 200 parcels that we can use, vacant properties, and looking at vacant buildings. I said from the very beginning of these forums that we could begin using these parcels, these empty buildings, and make sure we have transitional housing and affordable housing and workforce housing. I would do that as your mayor. Thank you.
Jeff Yarborough.
So I appreciate that the question poses this as a crisis, because that's exactly what it is. we are facing a crisis when it comes to housing. And I agree completely with Vivian that right now we don't have as many places to live as we got people who are looking for places to live, and it's putting upward pressure on price across the board, from rentals to starter homes to our elderly who are looking to downsize. And we are going to have to be serious that the sort of small ball solutions that we have been advancing are nibbling around the edges of a much larger problem. So here are a few things that we've got to do, and I want to be a little bit specific here. First, we do need much better at preserving affordability where it is. I think that means that you've got to be taking much better advantage of property tax freezes and working with some of your nonprofits to rehabilitate homes so that people can stay in affordable housing in the neighborhoods they live in. Two, I think we have to make it easier for people to move from being renters to homeowners. That's financial programs, savings programs, down payment assistance programs, especially for the teachers, firefighters, and cops who make this city work. And it's wrong that they can't live here. And third, we have to get much more ambitious in the way that we're leveraging land and that's owned by Metro and public dollars to really ramp up the amount of housing that we are building where we've got infrastructure and demand to support it.
Thank you. Ellis Ruley?
Yeah, so I think of this from three approaches. The first has been stated is around the idea of getting more serious about our government-owned land. Right now, our city government thinks of our land as a collection of departments and not what the highest and best use is for the citizens who live here. So that's a first approach, and specifically, I was with a friend a couple of weeks ago in Donaldson. We have space next to Stanford Elementary Montessori School, and across the street is a teacher who lives there and works at the school. Putting housing adjacent to schools where we've got additional land makes a lot of sense for our teachers and our first responders. Second, we've got to get government out of the way. And Senator Yarborough here at the state level has done a wonderful job at helping free up some permitting processes. Government is lagging in much of its approach. So to speed the permitting of housing stock requires us taking an entrepreneurial attitude. And then third, to stop making our housing less affordable, we have to stop raising taxes. For the last 15 years, this city government has consistently spent more money than it takes in. And that means that we are not taking an approach that is thinking first of the taxpayers and how we make sure we are managing their dollars so that they can afford to live here.
Thank you very much.
Next question.